A 131-ton block of stone is sitting on a plateau almost 13,000 feet above sea level. No crane touched it, no engine moved it, and the people credited with putting it there are said to have used ropes, stone hammers, and sand. That's not a legend. That's the official position of mainstream archaeology on Puma Punku. Stay with that for a second, because most videos about this place rush past it to get to the aliens. We're not doing that. We're going to sit inside the accepted story, first the boring textbook version, and see if it actually holds its own weight. Literally. Because here's the thing nobody tells you going in. The mainstream explanation for Puma Punku isn't simple. It isn't a shrug. It's a detailed, specific, load-by-load account of how a civilization without iron, without the wheel, and without draft animals capable of hauling tons of rock, supposedly built one of the strangest structures on the planet. And specific claims can be checked. That's what we're going to do. Let's start with what everyone agrees on, because there isn't much of it. Puma Punku sits on Bolivia's high Altiplano, part of the larger Tiwanaku complex near Lake Titicaca. Radiocarbon dating puts its main construction phase around the 6th century AD, roughly 536 to 600, built by the Tiwanaku civilization, a culture that thrived for centuries before the Inca ever existed. That part isn't controversial. Archaeologists agree on it. Here's where it gets interesting. The largest confirmed block at the site is red sandstone, measuring about 7.8 meters long and weighing an estimated 131 metric tons. That's heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 737. It was quarried roughly 10 kilometers away and dragged uphill across open terrain to its current position. Picture that for a second. Not a number on a screen, the actual scene. A block the length of 2 city buses, cut from bedrock by hand, inching across the Altiplano on nothing but sledges and human muscle, while the thin mountain air fights every single step. 10 kilometers doesn't sound impossible until you remember the altitude. At nearly 13,000 feet, the air holds a fraction of the oxygen found at sea level. Physiologists estimate sustained human work capacity drops by 20 to 30% at that elevation. Every haul, every pull on a rope, cost the builders more than it would cost you or me. But the sandstone isn't even the strange part. The finer, more precisely carved stones at Puma Punku aren't sandstone at all. They're andesite, a dense volcanic rock. And the andesite didn't come from anywhere nearby. Geological sourcing traces it to quarries on the Copacabana Peninsula on the far side of Lake Titicaca, roughly 90 kilometers from the site. 90 kilometers across a lake, then uphill onto a plateau with no timber, because Puma Punku sits above the tree line where trees simply don't grow. So here's the first real crack in the official story, not a fabricated one, an honest one. How do you get multi-ton volcanic stone across open water and up a mountain, using a culture that, according to the archaeological record, had no wheel, no draft animals capable of hauling that kind of load, and no local wood for sledges or rollers? Most people never question this part of the story. They hear ancient civilization and assume the logistics were simple because the tools were simple. But simple tools and simple problems are not the same thing. A 90-kilometer stone haul across a lake at oxygen-starved altitude is not a small-scale project by any era's standard. It's a small-scale miracle of coordination, whether or not anything unexplained was involved. Mainstream archaeology does have an answer. It's just not a simple one. The proposed method involves reed boats, the same Totora reed watercraft, still built by Aymara communities on Lake Titicaca today for the water crossing, followed by earthen ramps, sledges, and enormous labor crews for the overland leg. Experiments at other Andean and Pacific sites have shown that hundreds of coordinated workers really can move stones of this scale using rope, log rollers, and packed earth ramps. It's grueling, it's slow, but it isn't physically impossible. That should settle it. Except it doesn't, Because moving the stone was never the hardest part. Cutting it was. Look closely at Puma Punku's H-blocks, the site's signature feature, and you'll find surfaces so flat and edges so square that, according to multiple site surveys, a blade can't slide into the seam where two blocks meet. Some of the drilled holes found in the stonework are spaced with a precision that looks less like handwork and less like art and more like a production line. The H-blocks aren't randomly shaped either. Their stepped, interlocking profile repeats across dozens of separate stones, as if a single template guided every one of them, a strange kind of standardization for a culture with no known written measurement system. Some of the grooves between blocks were once filled with cast metal clamps made from a copper arsenic nickel bronze alloy, poured molten into the stone to lock separate blocks together. That's not speculation. Archaeologists have recovered the clamp channels, and metallurgical analysis has confirmed the alloy. Somebody 13 centuries ago, on a treeless plateau 2.5 miles above sea level, was casting bronze. That single fact deserves more attention than it usually gets. Casting metal means controlling fire hot enough to melt an alloy at an altitude where oxygen is already scarce. It's a real documented achievement, and it rarely makes the highlight reel, because the Tiwanaku were skilled metallurgists doesn't trend the way Ancient Aliens does. Here's where most documentaries make a leap they shouldn't. They tell you, copper tools are too soft to cut andesite, therefore something advanced lasers, machines, extraterrestrial help must have been involved. It's a clean line. It's also incomplete. Because archaeologists excavating the quarries around Puma Punku found something the leap conveniently skips: stone hammers. Piles of them, still scattered at the quarry sites today. The evidence suggests the blocks weren't sliced by a blade at all. They were battered into rough shape with harder hammerstones, then patiently ground smooth with flat abrasive stones and sand, the same way ancient Egyptian masons shaped granite without iron tools. It's not fast, it's not glamorous, but it's real, and it's documented at the site. So, does that close the case? Not quite, because there's still a question mainstream archaeology answers more quietly than it should. If stone hammers and sand can explain the shaping, why does the finish on the best preserved andesite blocks still unsettle stonemasons who study it today? Modern quarrymen who've handled tools capable of similar tolerances have looked at Puma Punku's surfaces and admitted the consistency is hard to replicate without measuring instruments the Tiwanaku aren't known to have used. That's not proof of anything exotic. It might simply mean we've underestimated how skilled a dedicated, patient, generational workforce can become at one task, repeated for centuries. But it's an open question, not a solved one, and any honest account of this site has to leave it open. Now here's the turning point, the detail that reframes everything else you just heard. The idea that Puma Punku is mysterious isn't new, and it isn't a modern internet invention. It goes back to the first European ever to see it. In 1549, a Spanish chronicler named Pedro Cieza de Len rode through the Bolivian highlands documenting the collapsed Inca Empire. He expected ruined Inca cities. Instead, he found something: older stone doorways cut from single blocks, statues too massive to explain, scattered across a windswept plain that the Inca themselves didn't claim to have built. Cieza de Len asked the local people who built it. Their answer, recorded in his own writings, was that the ruins predated the Inca by generations and that the builders were unknown to them. That's not a modern conspiracy theory. That's a 500-year-old field note. The mystery of Puma Punku didn't start on YouTube. It started the moment the first outsider laid eyes on it. But here's what most retellings leave out. The Inca themselves didn't claim Puma Punku either. They absorbed Tiwanaku and its ruins into their own mythology, treating the site as sacred ground where the world began, a place of origin, not a place they'd built. So the confusion over who made this wasn't invented by outsiders looking for a mystery. It was already there, passed down by the very people living closest to the stones. Walk further into the wider Tiwanaku complex, and the questions don't get smaller. The Acapena Pyramid rises in stepped terraces that were once faced entirely in cut stone, its interior channels engineered to manage drainage on a mountain plateau where a bad rainy season could otherwise flood a temple to its foundations. The Kalasasaya courtyard, framed by towering stone pillars, appears to have doubled as a solar calendar, its walls oriented closely enough to the solstice sunrise that modern surveyors can still track the alignment today. And inside it stands the Gate of the Sun, a single 10-ton block of andesite carved with a central figure believed to represent a solar deity, surrounded by dozens of smaller winged attendants whose exact meaning is still debated. Whatever this civilization was doing, they were tracking the sky as carefully as they were shaping stone, and it deepened in the early 20th century when a self-taught researcher named Arthur Posnansky spent nearly 4 decades measuring the site's alignments. He argued that the Kalasasaya Temple, one of Puma Punku's neighboring structures, was oriented to track solstice sunrises with such precision that its true construction date had to be far older than 500 AD by his calculation, closer to 15,000 BC, based on the slow, measurable wobble of Earth's axis over time. It's a genuinely elegant argument. It's also one that modern radiocarbon dating and decades of excavation have not supported. Consensus chronology, backed by dozens of independent samples, keeps landing in the same window, roughly 500 to 600 AD. Most archaeologists today treat Posnansky's astronomical date as a fascinating historical footnote, not a credible timeline. The alignments he measured are real. But the leap from aligned with the sun to built 17,000 years ago doesn't hold up under later scrutiny. So where does that leave us? Not with aliens. Not with a lost global supercivilization. What it leaves us with is something quieter and, honestly, more interesting. A culture we've badly underestimated. The Tiwanaku had no writing system we've deciphered, no wheeled vehicles, no iron, and yet they engineered raised agricultural fields that kept frost from destroying crops at freezing altitude. They cast bronze alloy clamps to lock their stones together, a real, physically confirmed metallurgical technique found embedded in the site's grooves. They moved 100-ton stones across a lake and up a mountain without a single machine, using nothing but labor, patience, and knowledge passed down without a single written page. That's the actual mystery. Not who else could have done this, but how did they do this? And why did we assume they couldn't? Because here's the uncomfortable pattern underneath every ancient mystery video you've ever watched. It's almost always easier to imagine outside help than to sit with the discomfort that a culture without our tools out, thought and out, worked what we assume the past was capable of. Puma Punku doesn't need a lost civilization from beyond the historical record to be extraordinary. It only needs you to stop assuming that primitive and brilliant can't describe the same people. Somewhere around 1,000 years ago, Puma Punku was abandoned. Nobody knows exactly why drought, conflict, and social collapse have all been proposed, and none has been proven. Some researchers point to a prolonged dry period recorded in regional lake sediment data around that time. Others suspect internal unrest fractured the empire from within. The people who could have answered that question left nothing behind but the stones. And maybe that's the real reason this place refuses to let go of us. Not because it hides a secret too advanced for its time, but because it hides a society too advanced for our assumptions and then vanished before it could correct us. We filled that silence with stone hammers and sand on one side, and lost civilizations and ancient machines on the other. Both stories are attempts to explain the same uncomfortable gap, a level of achievement we didn't expect, from people we didn't take seriously enough. The stones are still doing what they've always done, not screaming we were visited, Just asking, quietly, in a language we're still learning to read, what else did we get wrong about what people were capable of before we ever gave them the credit?